Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week as always on this Valentine's Day. So all you data lovers out there, this is probably going to be the least fun thing you're going through today, hopefully. Now, with that, I'd like to thank the following people that basically linked me, tagged me, sent me messages, whatever it was to get me this information. It is always appreciated. And that is Andrew McLean, David Walker, Barrett Peterson, Jason Dance, and Sander Slidnerink. Guys, thank you so much. And if you have a tip for me, please feel free to send it my way. And I'm more than happy to give you a shout out here and on the radio when I do my nationally syndicated radio show. So with that, let's begin and start with Yandex. This is a Russian search and email provider. I actually did a daily video / podcast on them. Basically, they said the other day that they caught one of their employees selling access to user email accounts for personal gain. I kid you not. The company, which did not disclose who the individual was, said that the person was only one of 3 administrators that actually had access to provide technical support to get into these mailboxes, and they basically are notifying the 4,887 owners of those mailboxes of this, and basically have told the Russian authorities that this has happened. So hopefully that will get cleaned up quickly, but this really underscores if it's free to you, you're the product, good, bad, or ugly. Moving on. Let's talk about Excellion. They had a data breach the other week that I talked about, and this is actually an update. So if you recall, last week, the Office of the Washington State Auditor, or SAO, in the state of Washington got breached to the tune of 1.6 million people that were affected, that were filing unemployment claims in that state. Now we're seeing a steady trickle of companies, universities, banks, and other entities that are disclosing their involvement in this breach because, again, Excellion is supplying a whole bunch of institutions. So far, it's basically unclear how many of Excellion's clients were affected. The firm says they serve 3,000 global corporations and government agencies worldwide, and they claimed in January that it was, quote, less than 50 companies that have been affected by this, but the number seems to have gone up. When asked to give a full list of the affected clients this past Thursday, an Excellion representative said via email to one of the publications that the company was still looking into it. And so it looks like the number that's being floated around right now is not 50, it's 300. And some of the new disclosures, and basically some of these I've actually reported to you in past breaches of the week's videos, but we didn't know they were Excellion breaches at the time. And these would be the University of Colorado, Singtel, which is a Singapore-based telecom conglomerate, QIMR Berghofer Medical Research Institute, which basically is in Australia, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, which I have mentioned, and Harvard Business School. This could be the next Blackbaud level breach, and it's in the running to be one of the worst breaches of 2021, as it's a supply chain hack. We will see, and obviously I will keep you up to date here every Sunday. Next up is CD Projekt Red. This is a video game development studio that was behind the somewhat disastrous release of Cyberpunk 2077 and also the Witcher trilogy, which I actually believe is now a show on Netflix as well. They disclosed a ransomware attack that impacted their network. Now, the ransomware attack was coordinated by a little-known ransomware gang, although we've been tracking them here at Security Fanatics. The group is Hello Kitty, and so basically the gaming studio said in their official statement that the attackers breached the internal network and were able to collect basically group data before encrypting the systems and leaving a ransom note. So hopefully no information was stolen as it pertains to employees or users or anything in the like. I will keep you up to date on that one as well, but heads up, if you have anything to do with CD Projekt Red, including, let's say, logins for The Witcher or Cyberpunk 2077, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about a web hosting company called No Support Linux Hosting. They just got put out of business, literally. Now, here's what's going on. No Support Linux Hosting announced on February 9th that they were shutting down after an attacker breached its internal systems and compromised the quote-unquote entire operation. That's right. According to a message posted on their official website that has now been archived, the company says that it was breached on Monday, February 8th. The attacker appears to have compromised the company's entire operation, as I just mentioned, including its official website, administrator sections, customer database, and more. A spokesperson for the company did not return requests for comments, And basically, the details right now are unclear. The attack appears to have obviously been very destructive in nature. We're assuming the removal or wiping out of data or encrypting of data that they cannot afford to get back. And so the company basically acknowledged, and I quote, "We can no longer operate the no-support Linux hosting business. They are done. This is why we need good operational data and cybersecurity controls for our businesses. They can literally put you out of business." Moving on, let's talk about Experian. This is the large credit bureau that has basically all of our information in the same way Equifax does. Wah, wah. So with that, they said this past Monday that they are conducting an investigation into data illegally being sold on the internet, which may have been sourced from one of their subsidiaries, a company called Serasa, Serasa. Now, this basically, the credit reporting agency, Experian, said that the data offered for sale includes photographs, social security information, vehicle registrations, and social media login details, which Serasa, which is a Brazilian credit research firm, doesn't actually collect or hold. The data may have been sourced from Serasa's non-sensitive marketing data, according to Experian. And if that is the actual case, then hopefully no personally identifiable information such as social security numbers or Brazilian national ID cards in this case were hit. There is no evidence that positive or negative credit data has been illegally obtained, and in spite of their investigations, Experian is saying there's no evidence that their systems were compromised as well. Experian is basically responding to speculation, said that the protection of their data was obviously their priority, and they will provide further updates, which you will hear here. And so here's hoping we are not sitting on some kind of Equifax level breach where we find out that Experian got compromised way more, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully not. So with that, let's move on. The New Zealand Stock Exchange. This is an update on a past attack that I talked about the other week. The website of the New Zealand Stock Exchange basically got hit a Tuesday afternoon in August, and it was so badly throttled that the exchange couldn't post market announcements as required by financial regulators in New Zealand. So basically, they shut the entire trading floor down with an hour left on trading, and it didn't take long to figure out what happened. Now we know the website has been overwhelmed basically by a directed denial of service attack, and the official report that was just released the other week confirms that because they didn't put proper mitigations for DDoS attacks in place. Again, we need good cybersecurity on everything, especially a stock exchange, which is essentially one of the core components of the New Zealand economy, as the stock exchange in the United States is here. So please make sure that you are defending your stock exchanges. Moving on, let's talk about CAN Group, that's CANN Group in Australia. These guys supply marijuana. Now, it looks like they might have had a chronic case of a cyber attack on their hands because they apparently have lost around $3.6 million US in a recent breach. Now, on February 4th, CAN Group made payments of around $3.6 million to an overseas contractor for works being undertaken at its Malura factory. However, these funds were intercepted by an unknown third party, and here we are. So basically, they began working with the bank to see if they could withdraw that payment or get it recovered or whatever that is. They're still ongoing, and they're also looking to weed out any issues with the integrity of their IT systems, and hopefully they will get back on their feet. There you go. Moving on, let's talk about Syracuse University in the state of New York. Basically, the names and social security numbers of about 9,800 university students, alumni, and applicants were exposed after someone gained unauthorized access to an employee's email account. Now, the university has sent letters to affected students alerting them that the university had investigated a security breach involving some of their personal information. The unauthorized party accessed the employee email's account between September 24th through September 28th, and upon learning of this, Syracuse secured the account and launched an investigation, and so hopefully that won't be a problem. But if you went to Syracuse, go to Syracuse, or have anything to do with Syracuse University in upstate New York, you might want to check in. Moving on, let me give you an update on Wilmington Surgical Associates out of North Carolina, because they are now facing a lawsuit over a data breach that happened in October of 2020. And I went back and I looked and I did report on that. Now, the practice was basically the victim of a ransomware attack that was carried out by NetWalker, which is essentially a criminal hacking group that has targeted other healthcare providers in the past. Although NetWalker recently, in the last couple of months, basically got arrested in Canada and Bulgaria, and their ransomware sites were seized. So NetWalker is effectively out of business. Nevertheless, we are still facing the repercussions of this, and so heads up, there's a lawsuit pending for Wilmington Surgical Associates, and if you too basically are a patient of there, you may also be entitled to compensation. Moving on, let's talk about Nebraska Medicine and the University of Nebraska Medical Center, because they're notifying patients and employees whose personal information may have been compromised last fall. Now, the Omaha World Health reports that a breach may have affected up to 219,000 people in Nebraska and other states that use this health system. Health officials said in a statement that an investigation began in late September and found no evidence that people's personal information from the breach had been used to commit fraud or identity theft. That is a boilerplate response. If we can't identify it, we simply can say, hey, we don't know, we can't see anything of it. That's not necessarily meaning it's not out there. It simply just hasn't been found. So obviously they discovered this problem, for the record, on September 20th, and essentially this led to the postponement of patient appointments during that time, and that required the staff actually in the hospitals to actually start charting by hand because the computer systems were hit hard. So hopefully Nebraska Medicine and the University of Nebraska Medical Center will get back on their feet and get through this. Moving on, let's talk about Bannock County, Idaho, because their officials are saying there appears there was no actual attempted misuse of data as a result of a cybersecurity incident last summer. Now, basically, the county learned on June 30th of last year that its computer network was possibly accessed by an unknown person around June 22nd, and the county began working to obviously figure out the scope and mitigate the risk and etc. In July, the investigation confirmed personal information was acquired by an unknown person, and since then, the county says it's undertook a review of potentially impacted data, and this is all now coming to light. So heads up if you're in Bannock County, Idaho. Moving on, let's head on over to Seattle and talk about automatic funds transfer service. This is another supply chain breach because between Wednesday and Thursday, attackers used ransomware. This past Wednesday and Thursday, attackers used ransomware to encrypt the servers hosted by Automatic Funds Transfer Service, and basically they are catering to municipalities, apparently all in the area in the state of Washington from what I could find. And so now we're getting disclosures from Monroe, Washington, the North Shore Utility District in the state of Washington, Kirkland, Washington, Bainbridge Island, Washington, Mount Lake Terrace, Washington, Auburn, Washington, and Alderwood, Washington. So if you are in any of those cities, counties, municipalities, whatever the heck they are, you might want to check in because your information may have been compromised as you were paying your bills. And finally, and this is actually a bit of a shorter week than usual, but what we don't have in quantity, we are definitely making up for in quality, because let's head on down to Florida in the city of Oldsmar. And I actually did a daily video and podcast on this one as well, because this past Monday, officials from Pinellas County, where Oldsmar is, announced that an unidentified attacker remotely gained access to the control panel that basically runs the city of Oldsmar water treatment system and changed a setting that would have drastically increased the amount of sodium hydroxide in the water supply. Now, during a press conference, the county sheriff, Bob Gualtieri, said that basically a legitimate operator, meaning an employee, saw the change and quickly reversed it, but it signaled that the hacking attempt was a serious threat to the city's water supply. If you didn't know, sodium hydroxide is also known as lye, and therefore it can be, if it's ingested in large amounts, it can be rather deadly. And so, according to the sheriff, and I quote, the hacker changed the sodium hydroxide from about 100 parts per million to 11,100 parts per million. Those are obviously dangerous levels. And then he was asked if this should be considered an attempt at bioterrorism. And Gualtieri said, and I quote, "What it is someone hacked into the system not just once but twice, open the program and change the levels from 100 to 11,100 parts per million with a caustic substance. So you label it however you want. Those are the facts." And it really does seem to be a problem if that employee that really wasn't maintaining that vigilance, or just even happened to randomly walk by and notice and say, hey, wait a second, that's way too much lye for the water, which they would use for things like disinfecting at a very low level and all of that safely. And now obviously at that part, we would have had bodies dropping in the city of Oldsmar, which has a population of about 15,000 or so. with some frequency, that would have been a disaster. That would have been a crime or an act of bioterrorism or something else. Now, since I did that video and podcast, I believe it was actually that Monday when that news broke, because how could I not? We have some other things that have come to light. We know that the plant had lax security on Monday, but now we know that they were running copies of Microsoft Windows 7. Those basically are end of life by Microsoft, meaning they are not getting security updating anymore, which means they are vulnerable very easily to compromise. The employees were also sharing passwords for logins for multiple computers, basically one password for many different things. And so once that's cracked, you can get into everything. They were also running an unsecured version of TeamViewer for remote access. If you go back and Google TeamViewer data breach, you will see they've had a few compromises in the past as well. And so locking down TeamViewer with things like multi-factor authentication or other identity management systems and strong passwords is very, very important. But I think overall, this really speaks to a lack of funding or underfunding that we have at the local level of government. We're all focused on things like the SolarWinds breach and how the Department of Treasury or the Department of Homeland Security funds themselves, and they are basically sourced and have a lot of detection systems and personnel. But when you have a municipality of 15,000 people and they are funding basically their own city government, essentially IT infrastructure and therefore cybersecurity as a subset of that tends not to get the funding because, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is the problem that we have. We are going to have a serious problem, and we already have it, but it's been growing, especially during the pandemic and everybody working remote, of small towns, municipalities, counties that are underfunded or on the lower income side of things have very serious problems with cybersecurity standards, which means you don't necessarily have to hit the federal government in the United States to do serious damage when you can hit and just walk right into 1,000 different small cities and really screw things up from coast to coast. This is a problem that we've got, and this is not our only thing that we're going to be talking about today, because our finally, the last thing I want to talk about involves Microsoft, Apple, PayPal, Shopify, Netflix, Tesla, Uber, and a total of 35 big tech or massive firms. And the reason why I'm talking about this, and it's somewhat terrifying, is that an ethical hacker named Alex Burson basically demonstrated a novel supply chain attack that breached the systems of more than basically these 35 tech players, Microsoft, Apple, PayPal, etc. Burson injected malicious code into common tools for installing dependencies in developer projects, which typically use public repositories like GitHub. I'm not trying to get technical here because I know a good chunk of my audience isn't technical, but oftentimes when you have a repository like GitHub, you can make it public and people can see or share your code. It makes it very collaborative, but at the same token, if you're, let's say, not securing these, somebody might be able to alter your code as well, especially if you've got it marked to private. Now, the malicious code that he was using then used the dependencies from that program to essentially spread malware through the targeted company's internal applications and systems. The vulnerability he exploited, which he is now calling dependency confusion, which I actually think is a really good name, was detected inside more than 35 organizations to date across 3 different programming languages. He was using Python, Ruby, and Java. And I think what this really speaks to, and I think this also underscores the problems we have with SolarWinds, although SolarWinds was basically lax security, as I've mentioned before, and it is ridiculous, and I'll probably tattoo it to myself and on my grave. SolarWinds password was SolarWinds 123. That is what you put on your luggage. But this situation, and I think in some veins SolarWinds, after they got in, really shows us that we need to secure and improve our software development life cycles, as well as the operational security on how we store and access code. If, let's say, Microsoft and Netflix, etc., are using, let's say, publicly open GitHubs, and people are able to get in and edit things, and they're not catching this, and then it's getting integrated into their infrastructure or their platforms. It's a very serious problem that we have here. And so by virtue of that, it's something that we really need to lock down. And one of the things that we consult on is software development lifecycle, and making sure that as you are going through change management, you are identifying every code change you have. When you go from 1.0 to 1.1, 1.1 to 1.2, that should be table stakes and standard, not to mention vulnerability management to make sure you're turning around updates and fixes when vulnerabilities are found. We are human, so we make human errors when we program. And so those were your breaches of the week. It was absolutely crazy, and hopefully you guys are all having a good Valentine's Day. I know I am, minus the breaches of the week because nobody wants to talk about these things. Were you affected? Let me know. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.